Good afternoon. Welcome to the weekly Livestock Market Update. I'm Brownfield Anchor reporter Meghan Grebner with us as always to talk all things markets, University of Missouri. Scott Brown. Good afternoon, Scott.
Good afternoon, Megan.
It is going to be an in and out type of day for us. Just a couple of things to focus on as we take a look at reports from the USDA. But to kick things off, let's recap what happened this week in the markets.
Yeah, on the cattle side this week, live fed cattle were basically unchanged this week, Megan. Those feeder cattle auctions, though, were steady to $2 higher. On the future side, the June live cattle futures contract was up $1.05, while the May feeder contract actually closed down $1.10. Corn was also off this week. Those May corn futures down 27 cents. On the beef side, we gained $2.73 on the choice box beef price this week. That now puts it $46 above where it was a year ago. On the hog side, cash barrels and gilts this week were 35 cents higher. We got some good strength in the futures side with the June lean hog futures contract up $5.50. The pork cutout value gained 66 cents this week. That now puts it $26 below where it was a year ago.
I think the interesting part about this week has been there were 3 days in a row of stronger cash business at larger runs, which is kind of a 180 from what we've been seeing in recent weeks. Does that give us a little demand optimism heading into summer grilling season and thinking about demand for U.S. pork on the global market in general?
Yeah, I think maybe we've overdone with some of the downside, and we're trying to begin to catch back up, and maybe that's what we're seeing here. We'll see what happens the next few weeks, but we certainly have started with what's been a weaker demand picture, and I don't know. We'll see what happens here to general economic growth as we go forward. This first quarter news wasn't the greatest that we got this week, only up 1.1%.
All right, let's get into those weekly slaughter numbers as we take a look at that. Interesting, I think, on the hog side of things. I know there was a plant shutdown in Nebraska this week. Is that kind of coming into play with the lower slaughter numbers on the hog side?
I think it is, Megan. When we look at the cattle side for the week ending April 29th, run of 620,000 head of cattle, that's down 2,000 head from where we were a week ago and down 27,000 head from where we were a year ago. Shorter run on the hog side, USDA is calling a 2.387 million head run this week, down 67,000 from a week ago, but still up 20,000 relative to where we were a year ago.
Let's talk about those percentages year over year as we take a look at both cattle and hogs.
Yeah, so a little more of the same as we've been talking. Cattle slaughter year to date down 3.2%, while hog slaughter now stands 1.6% higher.
The biggest report this week I think we're going to talk about is that cold storage report as we take a look at that and take a close look at both beef and pork ending stocks. The pork numbers a little bit of a standout for me.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we need to keep them a little bit in perspective. If we start with pork ending stocks, USDA said at the end of March, 434 million pounds of pork in freezers. That was 9.9% above where we were a year ago, 18.4% above where we were in 2021, but 13.5% lower than where we were in 2020. Now, that was kind of the beginnings of COVID, but when you look at it relative to 2019, down 12.2%. So, we're in some ways, we're getting back to maybe what's more traditional stock levels on the pork side. Bellies, 77 million pounds of bellies in freezers at the end of March. That's 35% above where we were last year, but down 1.5% from where we were in 2020. On the beef side, 481 million pounds of beef in cold storage at the end of March. That was down 10.3% relative to a year ago. And relative to 2019, that's 6.4% higher. So again, I think all that cold storage news doesn't concern me too much, I guess, at this point.
Bacon prices?
So it would seem that we'll keep putting some pressure on bacon prices, although I will keep reminding us that the linkage from what's happening at the wholesale till we get to the retail and you and I get to purchase it still has a lot of costs involved. So it may be sticky and go down slower than we might anticipate given some of that stock levels that we hold. I'll also say the other piece of that news out of cold storage was chicken, 854 million pounds of chicken. That's 8.6% higher than a year ago. So some stock rebuilding happening on the chicken side. Turkeys as well, 338 million pounds of turkeys in freezers, 9.8% above a year ago. So we're seeing some rebuild, I think, from some of the avian influenza issues that would have plagued 2022.
As we look ahead to 2023, I know we're early on, right? And how much are we watching in terms of chicken stocks and what happens specifically with how hard hit we are with high path avian influenza this year?
Yeah, so can we have this discussion at the end of 2023? Because of course we're going to know the answer to this question, but we could be both sides of this. So avian influenza not as big this year as we get through all of 2023 means I think we have more chicken supplies, probably puts pressure on chicken prices, might put more cross price pressure on beef and pork, at least some cuts there. Same for turkey. So we're going to watch carefully and see what happens. We certainly seem to have started 2023 in a better shape in terms of avian influenza outbreaks in at least commercial operations.
But if I don't get your thoughts now, it's cheating at the end of the year, Scott.
I'm a great forecaster of the history. That's all I can say.
Wouldn't that make you a historian? Wrong career path for you. All right. As we wind down today, we're going to talk restaurant performance index. I think this is such a great snapshot, I think, of how we're feeling as an economy. Talk to me about March's numbers.
Yeah. So we fell 1% in the March restaurant performance index, and that was both lower current situation. So when I say that, same store sales down, customer traffic down, labor costs up, capital expenditures up. And so it's just all that current situation news wasn't great. At the same time, expectations have dampened a little bit as well. And so I think all of that corresponds very nicely to what was maybe weaker than expected first quarter GDP growth. It just reminds me to say we still have uncertainty. I don't want us to be on here saying we have a recession coming for sure, but there's some signs that consumers are seeing tougher sledding economically as we've gotten further into 2023 here, as higher interest rates certainly take a bite out of what they have available to spend. And so there's some reasons to be concerned and continue to watch what's happening on that consumer side of the equation.
As we look ahead to next week, monthly trade data comes out, jobs report. As we take a look at those, obviously two different kind of stories in that. What are you looking for in monthly trade data? Is there any specific nugget you're looking for in that report? And what are we expecting on the job side of things?
Yes, I think that on the jobs report, it's going to be very interesting to see whether, the lower economic growth eventually tamps down jobs. If we keep growing jobs like we have been, what's the Fed do in terms of raising rates? So that jobs report to me has a lot to do with some of the rest of the levers that might get pulled as a result of that jobs report. I guess on the trade data, it's more whether we're seeing some of the other economies around the world that maybe are in a little better shape and are looking for more beef and pork in particular. So whether we start to see some better news on that trade front, I think is important. And of course, the big kid on the block always continues to be China and what they're doing, and whether we get any additional information there that suggests perhaps more pork headed to China here for the remainder of 2023. I'm not sure that's what we get out of the report, but we'll certainly want to pay attention to that.
Well, there will be plenty for us to talk about next week as we get into the month of May.
That's right.
It is, it's always great to see you. It's always great to pick your brain a little bit. Scott, I do want to ask, when we talk about some of these like global economic picture, the kind of the big picture economically, whether it's globally or here, sometimes we don't maybe make that connection to why it's so important to what happens on the price picture or how it comes back to the customer or the producer. Can you talk a little bit about kind of that connection from one end to the other just before we let you go today?
Yeah, for sure. And maybe I'll spin this differently than where you were trying to get me to go. But I think it's important to think about the big picture here for a minute. So we're always gaining efficiency in the production side of the equation. Heavier weights, more pigs per litter. Generally that trend's been up. Population growth, whether we're talking this country or around the world, is still increasing, albeit at a slower rate. So we've been slowing the rate of gain. Those two things and how they ebb and flow, I think matters a lot to whether we have low prices or higher prices for our products. Now, to the point I think you're making, per cap or per person consumption matters in that equation as well. And if we can get some growth in per capita consumption because incomes are stronger, demand's pulling, then all of a sudden we increase the likelihood of higher prices for producers. Yet if per capita consumption declines because consumer dollars are limited and they feel like they need to cut back on beef and pork consumption, then perhaps the productivity growth that we're talking about outweighs what's happening on the demand side. So it's a fine balance, but I always say those are the big picture pieces that one doesn't want to forget getting lost in what's happening each and every day. It's that balance between productivity gains and population and per cap consumption that matters.
Scott, always great to see you. We'll see you next Friday.
Have a good weekend, Megan.
To have our weekly livestock market update delivered to your email box every Saturday morning, go to brownfieldagnews.com. You can also submit questions and comments there. And for market updates every day and a recap of what happened on the commodity markets, check out John Perkins' Market Minute. Have a great weekend. I'm Meghan Grebner for Brownfield.